How are we to view or approach nature? Should we celebrate it with the zeal of a naturalist or a poet, wandering like William Wordsworth over our intrinsic relationship with nature when he writes, "I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze?" Or perhaps we should adopt a more philosophic, a more transcendental revere. As Thoreau once said, nature is full of genius, full of the divinity, so that not a snowflake escapes its fashioning hand. If we have not been seduced by the poetics of nature, then perhaps we can adopt a more economic, a more commoditized version of nature. Karl Marx writes, "For the first time in a capitalist society, nature becomes purely an object for humankind, purely a matter of utility, ceases to be recognized as a power of itself, and the theoretical discovery of its autonomous laws appear merely as a ruse so as to subject it under human needs, whether as an object of consumption or as a means of production." But as humans, do we have the right to adopt what John Foster claims to be a neoclassical approach to environmental economics, which attempts to turn the environment into a commodity which can be analyzed just like other commodities? Is nature nothing more than available natural resources to extract? At the same time, is it just us, middle-class Americans, that have this privileged right to experience nature and worship in its glory? Robert Bullard, in his book Dumping in Dixie, writes, "Environmentalists' continued emphasis on wilderness and wildlife preservation appeal to a population that can afford leisure time and travel to these distant locations. Many wilderness areas and national parks remain inaccessible to the typical inner-city resident because of adequate transportation. Is it right for us to segregate and separate nature from the rich and the poor, thus producing a divide between races as well? Is it practical or realistic for us not to consider the financial potential within a land? And how can anthropogenic activities such as agriculture justify the destruction of countless ecosystems under the banner of development and reducing rates of starvation? These questions and more become conflagrated within the context of California's statewide water crisis, which is narrowed within the outline of the Central Valley. The Central Valley of California is home to an eclectic string of cities, unusually high crime rates, innovation, and one of the most fertile and productive agricultural lands in the world. In order to fuel the $31 billion agricultural industry, water resources have become entirely invaluable. With the merging of the Wetlands Water District with the West Plains Water Storage District and the federal government's 1961 joint venture agreement with the state of California to construct the San Luis unit of the Central Valley Project, the creation of a major irrigation scheme created levees within the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is comprised of the San Joaquin River, the Sacramento River, the American River, the Mahalami River, and the Colorado River. The rivers most directly linked to agricultural irrigation are the San Joaquin, the Sacramento, and the American. All of these rivers have suffered major environmental degradation, ecosystem collapse, and the death of many fragile species. However, at the same time, agriculture in the Central Valley has had to suffer existing within a perpetual drought since 1987, drainage problems, and a 50% reduction in the amount of water that the Bureau of Reclamation has contracted to supply farmers in the valley. The effect of this on agriculture has led to increasing amounts of otherwise productive land being rendered useless, and a severe limitation in competing with the increasingly unforgiving international marketplace. The effect agriculture's constant demands for water has led to the creation of levees, dams, and land use conversion of riparian vegetation into productive agricultural land. These measures have invariably poisoned the Central Valley's natural environment. Some of the environmentalists from the Bay Institute, CalFed, and CalPIF list some of these environmental effects from the creation of this agricultural empire. Subsurface runoff has contaminated drainage ponds, the local aquifer, and the San Joaquin River, even killing and deforming water birds. Fresh water flows into the bay are reduced by 50% in half of all years. The state's 150-year-old salmon fishery has been closed or severely restricted in recent years. Unrealistic water supply commitments create demands that cannot be met, creating a never-ending cycle of over-allocation of water resources. Less than 5% of the estuary's historical wetlands, 11% of its vernal pools, and about 6% of its riparian zone remain. The pull of the pumps changed the direction of flow in many delta channels, thus destroying natural species and introducing invasive species. Estimated 95% of pre-European acres of riparian habitat in California's Central Valley has been lost to recent human activities. A variety of environmentalists from the Bay Institute, CalFed, CalPIF, and the San Joaquin River Parkway and Conservation Trust have projected a range of demands that are simply not realistic. Some of these restoration measures include removing barriers in the delta, such as levees, dams, limit stream diversions and local groundwater extractions, release sufficient amounts of water to provide stranded migratory fish with cool water holding and spawning habitats, control the rate of export pumping by the massive state and federal water project pumps, restrict net reverse flows, which are created by the levees, and introduce invasive species to relatively low areas, lower the cost of water and investments for urban residents, and thus increase the cost of water for agriculturalists, because urban residents generally pay a higher cost for water and invest more in conserving it than do agricultural growers, who consume most of the state's developed water supplies, pay less for it, and disproportionately impact aquatic environments, and restore some of the ecosystems converted into agricultural use. In a sense, the environmentalists are insisting on a complete annihilation of the Central Valley's agriculture, which would invariably annihilate the state's economy. Their demands are entirely unreasonable. It is interesting to analyze the language that these conservationists and environmentalists employ in their writing. Environmentalists are driven by sensationalized statistics. They are not so much concerned with the actual damage of the land, but more so interested in eliciting a sympathetic and financial response from figures of authority that will finance their ethos-driven schemes. These environmentalists do not use precise and composed language, but rather there is an air of hostility, of embitterment, of viciousness in their diction and syntactical construction. Also, it is interesting to note that within all of these restoration measures that I have read, agriculture wasn't even mentioned once. The argument that they frame and the measures that they deem as vital completely negate any form of compromise or communication with agriculture, but instead is regulated by a one-sided form of self-interested self-righteousness. Then it occurred to me that being an environmentalist, in the way that I perceive these environmental groups, is nothing more than being a part of a consumer group that is being seduced by a marketing scheme. When John Foster, in his book Ecology Against Capitalism, states, at the heart, the neoclassical approach to environmental economics has one aim: to turn the environment into a commodity which can be analyzed just like other commodities. He is not simply speaking to the way agriculture manipulates the environment. He is speaking more directly to these greenwashed environmentalists. Although Dupieux, in his article entitled The Food Crisis, Industrialized Farming in the Imperial Regime, claims that industrial agriculture involves disconnectedness between farming and nature, a similar disconnection between the land and people occur when these environmentalists don't consider the continuance of agriculture in their measures. To invade the infrastructure of agriculture in the valley, which has provided you with enough food energy to watch this film, is to separate mankind from nature in an extremely unnecessary and illogical way. If the levees and dams in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta are to be destroyed in order to restore damaged riparian areas, then what reasonable role can man play in nature? William Crono, in his essay, The Trouble with Wilderness, or Getting Back to the Wrong Nature, states that if wild nature is the only thing worth saving, and if our mere presence destroys it, then the sole solution to our unnaturalness, the only way to protect sacred wilderness from profane humanity, would seem to be suicide. Instead, these environmentalists belong to a certain elitist, high-class, and theoretical consumer group. Rather than wasting away their time purchasing affordable, inorganic, and GMO produce at Food Max, they prefer the unreasonably inflated prices of produce harvested from organic small farmers at Whole Foods.
I'm asking you to express your green self.
I love to cook. Yeah.
Flowers, and then the fruit, and then the vegetables, and that just gets you excited about it because everything just looks fresh. They call me the apple queen.
Gleaming with meat and vegetables. It's just beautiful.
Yes, this is just what I needed today.
The understanding of like what's a really, really good tasting carrot.
Like immediate, like endorphins.
If I have olive oil and garlic, I could make about anything.
Thai food. Yeah.
So here's what you do. You grab a camera like this, shoot a 2-minute video of yourself being the meanest and greenest you can possibly be. Show us some changes you've made at home or in your neighborhood. Rap, sing, dance, do whatever you want to do. Bottom line, express your green selves and have fun doing it. Then go to your computer, upload your video onto our
Rather
site.
than investing the resources, time and finances in an affordable $7,000 and relatively environmental Honda Civic, these environmentalists itch for inclusion in this consumer group and so spend upwards of $30,000 for a Toyota Prius, which by the fact of its steep price defines it as non-environmental because of the amount of capital, energy, and time needed to purchase such a vehicle.
You get more power and more space. The world gets fewer smog-forming emissions. The third generation Prius. It's harmony between man, nature, and machine.
In a similar way, the manifesto for this greenwash group is found in Michael Pollan's highly impractical slow food individual consumer choice that requires a level of economic comfortableness. The composition of this environmental group is entirely class-oriented and exclusive to the rest of society as a whole. A society that both respects nature and depends on agriculture for sustenance. The solution that I offer for this situation, although it has little relevancy or weight because the water issues in the Central Valley appear to be eternal for the time being, is one of inclusion. Although it is impossible for agribusiness firms and environmentalists to completely abandon their current philosophies and perspectives, and thus combine to create a new and perfect agribusiness firm founded on the belief of preserving the complete naturalness of the land, while at the same time producing crops, compromises can be reached. It must also be noted that it is also impossible for both parties to ever be completely satisfied. A level of give and take must occur if this inclusion is to happen. What I propose is for the federal government to subsidize agribusiness firms who include within their firm a conservation or environmental team ranging from 5 to 50 workers. These environmentalists would be easily funded both from the financial powerhouse of the agribusiness as well as the influx of federal subsidies to carry out various restoration, preservation, and conservation measures that align with the agricultural projections of their company. In this way, both the farmers and environmentalists would be linked to a common allotment of capital, thus ensuring a level of mutual agreement and understanding. If natural disasters occur, agribusiness and conservationists would both be affected, but not devastated because the federal subsidies would ensure a finite level of financial stability. Both agribusiness and environmentalists would benefit greatly from this measure because, as already displayed in this video, environmentalists have an incredibly persuasive and efficient ability at marketing and targeting an idealized consumer group. Through various marketing schemes, environmentalists within this theoretical agribusiness firm would expand the firm's clientele and consumer group almost exponentially, and even on a globalized scale. This would create more stabilized agribusiness firms in the global market. In terms of the benefits imparted on environmentalists, the steady flow of financial support as well as the availability of expansive resources, political support/power, more land acreage, etc., would ensure environmentalists a greater range for potential positive environmental impact. However simple this project may be to theorize, and however easy it is to project future positive effects from such a measure, water will continue being an issue in the Central Valley. This measure isn't aimed at either a complete dissolve of agribusiness or a wholehearted approval of the non-environmental practices of agribusiness. Rather, this solution is one simple way to create a dialogical relationship between agribusiness and environmentalists, between people and the land. It is one small step closer to a more holistic embrace of the tangible realities at force in land use and the idealized conceptions of primitive naturalism.